Schiff is the Music and Arts Librarian at Glazer College. He holds degrees in music from the University of Colorado and Wesleyan. A specialist in the music of the 20th century avant-garde, Schiff has written on the musical beginnings of the Surrealist movement. He has performed with John Cage in the album Lucier, and is featured in 3 films by performance artist William Pope Bell. His collaboration with sound theorist Douglas Kahn, the trombone of Chris Schiff, won the Mackerel Computer Art Contest of 1991. For more than 80 years, pianist Frank Glazer has thrilled audiences with performances noted for their skill and sensitivity. A native of Milwaukee, Glazer left for Europe at 17 to study composition with Arnold Schoenberg and piano with Arthur Schnabel. After returning to the United States, he embarked on a performing career that has included premieres of works by Joseph Schwantner, Gail Kubik, Lucas Foss, Wallingford Rieger, and Aaron Copland. He has played with many of the world's great orchestras, including the New York Philharmonic, Chicago Symphony, and the Boston Symphony under the baton of Sergei Kubisky. So welcome to Chris and Frank.
What we'll do is, I'm going to try to project here because I used to be an actor, and let's see if we can get Frank set up with the microphone.
I can stand up.
That's okay. Grab a seat. Grab a seat. So what we'd like to do is we're going to keep it a little bit loose here, but while I'm making sure that my computer will broadcast over the thing here. I want to tell you a little bit about how I first met Frank. I've been at Bates almost 11 years now, and about 2 months after I got there, Sharon Saunders came to me and she said, you know, Chris, I heard from the music department that Frank Glazer wants to give you some 78s. Now, we all know as music librarians that lots of times people say, oh, gosh, you know, I've got some 78s I want to give you. But let me tell you, when Frank Glazer says he wants to give you some 78s, you take the 78s, okay? There's no 2 ways about it. So, well, I went out and Frank and his dear wife, Ruth, were living in Glazer Falls at the time. And they had this beautifully restored house that had a wonderful performance space in it, and they had a huge barn. And so I got there, and we went out into the barn, and Ruth was out in the barn working with the 78s already. And so among the 78s that we got, there was a little stack like that. And I thought, wow, I wonder what's in those envelopes over there. What was in those envelopes are the transcription discs from Frank's 3 recordings at Carnegie Hall in the late 1940s and early 1950s. We have had those digitized, and we are, interestingly enough, when the Carnegie Hall text labeled them, they mislabeled them. So Frank and I have been trying to get the order of the movements correct on the different concerts. And so we'll see. I don't think we have a complete, we started with 48, and I don't think we've got a complete set for sure of 48, but we've got, we filled a terabyte with digitizing. We sent these recordings off. They're much too precious for us to be messing with on our own. So we've got a terabyte drive full of Frank's recordings. Okay, so that's number 1. So that's one of the lessons let me give you about when you're working with archives. Is sometimes people say, and you go, oh God, it's a moldy Benny Goodman recording, and sometimes it's not a moldy Benny Goodman. Okay. So next is, and let me move this one up here. Frank and Ruth wanted to move a little closer in. They were pretty far out in the country there. And so Frank said, well, you know, I've got some scores. I'm ready to pare down my score holdings. So come on out and take some scores. So in the midst of their move, I went out, and let me tell you, so this was my introduction to the Glazer archive. Before I'd been in the garage, in Frank's office there, the scores are in perfect order, on ideal shelving for scores and manuscripts. I go in, everything is in alphabetical order. I'm able to take it away in exactly the order that an archive would want it, okay? Among things that Frank gave us at that time, this is the manuscript for Variations for Two Pianos by Wallingford Rieger that Frank premiered. You can see that there are individual markings on there. There are a lot of additions to the score. Frank's fingerings you'll find throughout. And let's see here. That's just another shot of that same page. And then at the very back is a sheaf of letters. It says, Dear Mr. Glazer, here is the, I don't know what he said, I think it's the most recent passage. If some of the jumps are too extreme, just change the register. Best of luck, but I know you'll do a swell job. I'm only worried about the conductor saying, well, there's a whole sheaf of amendations like this. Now, Frank, tell us about the score on that.
Well, maybe I can talk better if I'm standing.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I played the European premiere of Wallingford Rieger's Variations for Piano and Orchestra. It's a 12-tone piece, and because I don't have a photographic memory, I had to play it many more times than he went through it in his brain. So in a way, I seem to know the piece better, the tempo better than he did for his own variations. Because when I did what he wrote, he wasn't happy. And when I did, I showed him what I thought it ought to be. He was quite happy about it. That's right. I think I'll change it. But he also wrote it in a version for two pianos. Now, it starts with a very quiet 12-tone theme, and then ends, the orchestra version does, with a 12-tone, with a soft ending. And Oliver Daniel, who was a pianist in Boston, and later vice president of BMI, said, Wallingford, if you want the piece to be successful, you've got to have a brilliant ending. So he made a brilliant ending, and it was published as such, but he didn't like it. Well, fortunately, I played it from the manuscript, and I played the quiet ending. Well, the reason I played it in the first place was that I had been asked by people at the Société Philharmonique in Paris to look at various piano concerti written in the 5-year period before we were talking about it, which was, we were talking about 1954, I think. So I looked at many concerti. Leon Kirchner, well, he wanted to do it himself with the New York Philharmonic with Metropolis, so he wouldn't give it to me. Roger Sessions, Lucas Voss, I thought his rondo, fantasy rondo, was somewhat discursive, so I didn't do that. Anyway, I finally settled on Wallingford Rieger's piece. And he told me he was really sorry he changed the ending. Well, we did it at the Queen Victoria Hall in Geneva, Switzerland. Osterley was there. He was a regular conductor of the Swiss Philharmonic, but he came as a guest. It was Juan Jose Castro, a South American conductor, who conducted. But while we were working on this piece, Wallingford Rieger would come to our apartment. Once he came with a second version of the cadenza, and he says, this is my 3 a.m. version. And I said, now, I need to know what you want to do, because in the first version you gave me, there are 2 notes and they have staccato over them. Now the version you bring me, you got 2 dots and a slur over them, which we would do as a kind of portamento. And so I said, which do you want? He said, he peered over my shoulder and he said, oh, decisions. Do it any way you want. So, and he took the stance of conductor, and I played as he conducted me. Suddenly he stopped and he said, don't you think it's a bit slow? Well, I was doing what he was conducting. I said, boy, do I, Mr. Rieger. May I show you what I feel the tempo of this ought to be? And I showed him, and he said, that's just right. I said, well, but you don't have that here. And this was already in the second proofs, which were being sent to Zurich to be published, printed. So had I not had that rehearsal with him, many of his metronome marks would have been wrong, although he didn't know they were wrong, though he put them down. And, I'm trying to think the next thing that happened. Oh, yes. Well, he said, well, you see, I didn't use a metronome. I used my stopwatch. So we got all the temps straightened out.
All right, let's see what else we got here. So another thing that came along, and this really speaks to one of the most amazing things about Frank as a musician, is that very early on he got interested in historically accurate recordings and performances. And so this is the 21st piano concerto or 25th? I can't remember. This is the Alberta. Yeah, that you played.
I played 40 concerto.
Yeah. So at any rate, this is so when Frank does Mozart, he goes out and buys the first edition of Mozart's concerto to look at the score so that he's doing a historically appropriate thing. So this is just in that stack of music he gave us, and when I saw Offenbach at the bottom, I was like, I wonder if this might be the real McCoy. And in fact, it is first edition of the Mozart Piano Concerto. Then the next one here, same thing with the Felix Mendelssohn Songs Without Words. Frank's edition is in fact a first edition and in remarkably good condition. But what was great about the Mendelssohn is it was bound, and at the back of it is a copy of the Henri Herz Rondo de Concert. And as near as I can tell, it's the only complete performing part set of the, so it's completely unperformable because all 4 of the string parts are bound in with the piano part. But we ended up with a complete set of Henri Herz because of the Mendelssohn. Let's see. Frank has worked with many composers down through the years. He is famous for his abilities with chamber music. And so this Shadows for Piano Quartet was written by Schwandler for what, the Eastman Quartet?
Yeah, Eastman Quartet.
Yeah, so that was written for Frank when he was with the Eastman Quartet.
He was at Eastman at the time.
Yeah. And, you know, among other things that we got also were Frank's books, which include some absolute gems. I'll give you an example here. This is New Musical Resources, the Henry Cowell, a pristine condition copy that published by Something Else Press, Dick Higgins Press. So in addition to original Mozarts, we also got Fluxus out of Frank. So, you know, that is the breadth of range of materials that we have in this collection. And then, I didn't mean to do that. Now this one here, this is a truly remarkable book cover. It's a 1937 book called The Psychology of Music. And when Frank's books came to us with all of the covers intact, and you'll notice that the dust jacket on this, the person on there is half African drummer and half timpanist. right? But one of the things I wanted Frank to talk about, he was one of the very earliest people to get interested in the psychology of piano playing and the physicality of piano playing. And it's one of the reasons why he still can do 8 recitals a year at Bates. And so Frank, would you talk a little bit about your technique for these guys?
I can, but I shouldn't. Sometimes the best way to make an enemy is to tell the truth. And when I've lectured on this subject to Piano Teachers Association, for example, North Carolina, I would say that there's no use practicing charity hand and cromer. Because if you're tense where you should be relaxed in the playing mechanism, and you should be relaxed where you should be tense in the right place and relaxed in the right place. And I say, if you play charity and you're tense where you shouldn't be, then it's not doing you any good. You might as well play great music. At least you're having great music. And if you're beautifully coordinated, then I would go along with the idea, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Some athletes are beautifully coordinated. But if they lose it, like Menuhin did as a child prodigy in the violin, you have to have conscious knowledge to find your way back. You can't rely on the so-called sensory appreciation, because that got you into trouble in the first place. So at one point, I decided, nobody had told me I didn't have enough technique. And I played this is after I played the Brahms B-flat concerto with Kusevitsky in Boston. But I decided I wanted to figure out, if I didn't know how to play the piano at all, how should I hold my hands on the keys, on the keyboard? There's so many hundreds of thousands of theories. Some people start like this, some people start like this. And my idea was very simple. To play in the most efficient manner is one idea. The other idea was to be able to get as many sounds out of the given piano you're playing as possible. In other words, if the piano is a piece of tin, you can never make it to gold, but you could at least get the benefit of all the grades of tin in it, and vice versa with gold and so on. So, and I want to know the truth about it, and how could you know? When I was 12 years old, my teacher in Milwaukee, who had studied with Leschetizky, said, well, Leschetizky said you should hold your hand as though there was a ball in it. And when you're 12 years old, in 1927, you didn't question your teacher. Anyway, Leschetizky was famous, so of course, as though there was a ball in your hand. But now, of course, I was also going along the idea, anything that works is useful, but if it works easier, that's better. So how to play in the most efficient manner. And now I ask myself the question, well, how big is the ball? If it's big, it'll look more like that when you're on, or small, look like this. How tightly shall I be holding the ball? As though you couldn't take it out if you tried, or as though if I opened up a little, it would flop out. So I had to figure all that out. Well, it took me quite a while, but I figured it out. And I must say it helped me, and it has helped a lot of my students. I have never had tendinitis, and neither had any of my students throughout my whole career, unless after they left me and went to somebody else, they got tendinitis. But they never got it with me. Because I made a study of it, actually. I studied the anatomy of the playing mechanism from Gray's Anatomy from year to year. Otto Ortman's book, The Physical Basis of Piano Touch and Tone. Alexander's technique, well, I read his 4 books back in 1940, 41, when he wasn't known in this country at all. And I also went to the New York Trade School to become a piano technician in order to know how the piano worked as a machine, to know whether if I'm trying to do something and it hasn't in it to do it, there's no use beating my head against the brick wall. It's never going to do it. Because you say, how could I do it on this piano? And now I can't do it on this piano. And they're both Steinway. Well, I finally figured out all these answers. It took me about 2 years to do it. Well, that's just, I was going to write a book on it, but then I decided I wouldn't, because you really have to have a one-on-one relationship Now you can do that through technology. Barbara Lister Sink, who teaches in North Carolina, has a student in Iceland. She can give a piano lesson. But that's only because he came for a year to North Carolina and studied there first to get an idea of the whole concept, you see. But you see, if I take away Czerny from the piano teachers, and they don't know what I know yet because they haven't had a chance to study it, what are they going to teach the student about technique? They have nothing. And so I don't blame them for staring at me in with stony faces. But the fact is still true that if you teach Czerny or play Czerny, and if you're tense where you should be relaxed and vice versa, you're going to get into trouble just as you would if you played Mozart or Bach. But at least if you play Mozart or Bach, you've got some great music. And what's the point of doing exercises unless they do you some good? Unless you just happen to love to do exercise. Well, I knew a man like that. Harry Kaufman was famous at the Curtis Institute, famous as the accompanying teacher. And he told me that it was a kind of a quirky thing. He said, everything that I could do with my left hand, technically, I wanted to be able to do with my left hand, technically. Even though no composer would ever write that same pattern for the left hand. He just wanted to be balanced in both hands. Life is too short to do that. I want to play the 24 etudes of Chopin, Paganini Liszt and all this stuff. We don't have time for that. But people have very, very strange ideas.
Okay, let's see, I'll show them a couple other things here. So, amongst the scores, and this will get us into the next thing here. So, at some point in time, I was sitting around with Frank out at his house, and we were looking at some recordings. We were taking some of his tapes and stuff. And he said to me, well, you know, I've got this binaural recording that Emery Cook did. And, you know, I can't find the tape where we put it back together, but he did. But he added some measures or something when Cook
When he put the tape together, yes.
Yeah. So there was an extra repeat or something in there. So Frank had the binaural recording, and I thought, well, you know, I could take that back and I can record it onto the computer and I can match the two tracks, because you understand that a binaural recording, for those of you who don't, do people understand out there that binaural is different from stereo? So binaural actually has a disc that has two simultaneous grooves going on it. Each one of the grooves has its own head that's playing it. And rather than the split that we're used to with stereo of right and left, a binaural recording splits it low and high like you were sitting in front of a piano. Now, the really interesting thing about it is, if you transcribe that into a modern recording, it sounds unbelievably fantastic. Right? Because it's like you're sitting in front of the keyboard and the sound is moving the right directions for you. So Frank said this. Well, then as I was driving back to Bates, I thought, wait a minute. Didn't Emery Cook give everything to Smithsonian? And so, you know, I checked, and sure enough, you know, Smithsonian has everything. But I went into Smithsonian Global Sound, and I could find all the other Emery Cook records, but I couldn't find Frank's. I called him up. I was like, where's Frank's record? So they said, okay, we'll root around in the archives here. And so their technician called me back, and he says, well, funny thing about that, we have never republished that because we don't have the cover for the record or the liner notes. So, because the Frank Glazer collection had a cover, it didn't even matter, because they're like, we don't want the binaural recording. We've got the master tapes. We need the cover in order to put it out. So we FedExed the cover down there to them, and then the lawyers kicked in. Okay. So the first thing they said was, can we get Frank to sign a contract with us? And I was like, I can get Frank to sign a contract There are no issues with getting Frank to sign a contract. So then, they got their contract signed, and how many times did we do addenda, Frank? It was like 3 passes on addenda to the contract. Because the first time the lawyers looked at it, and on the master tape of the recording, obviously, people were going over stuff with a microscope. On the master tape, it said, by arrangement with Polymusic Records. How many of you have heard of Polymusic Records? In 1951-52, they were the recording company to deal with in New York. If you look at the New York Times reviews of recordings, every time Polymusic came out with something, they were excited about it.
Well, they did the early Charles Ives.
Yeah. And you recorded, did you record the Ives with them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, not all of Ives. I did that later.
Yeah.
But we recorded the second violin sonata in autumn.
Right.
And Central Park in the Dark 40 years ago, where I had a dub over the first piano part. I played the second piano also.
Yeah. So Frank is on the premiere recording of Central Park in the Dark, and he plays both piano parts.
Yeah. And,
so,
and there was also Largo for piano, violin, and clarinet.
Yeah.
That played. And what else? That may be all on that record.
Yeah.
That was just 4 years before Charles Ives died, but I didn't meet him. He was living in Connecticut, and I was.
And you're the second violin sonata. You played off Kirkpatrick's transcription of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and we have the Kirkpatrick transcription, and I don't find it in OCLC. Because the more recently published transcription of the second violin sonata is the one that's in common currency. But this one, it was a rental part through Associated, I believe, or affiliated, and and it doesn't seem to have ever made it. This version doesn't seem to have ever made it out. So eventually, we've got a new cataloger at Bates, and we're going to be getting some of this stuff available. I'm saying this because those of you with graduate programs, I would highly recommend that you start looking at what we've got at Bates, because pretty soon you're going to start seeing some very unique materials available, and we love graduate students to come up and work in our archives. So we got this republished, and it's up, and let me see if my login is still available here. Let's see if Alexander Street Press is going to play for us. Here. If not, I'll start opening the drawer here. But I want you guys to hear the quality of recordings that came out of this.
It was the beginning of stereophonic recording, actually.
Yeah.
Does this explain the internal volume? You have music connected. Do you have the sound connected? Do you have it muted?
Yeah, it wasn't loading. Alexander Street was going to be recalcitrant on me, so. I came prepared with a disc. But anyway, so the great part of it was that, and this is where we come to the completeness of Frank's deposit with us, is that we had every scrap of paper from his negotiations with Polymusic Records, and Smithsonian had every scrap of paper from Emery Cook. And so we were able to put the two together. Now, in the end, the lawyers still, and who was it that ran Polymusic, Frank?
That did what?
That ran Polymusic. It was Imogen Kokas, right?
Will Lauren. His real name was Vladimir Chernyavsky, but he used to be Will Lauren. He was a conductor and composer, and was the head of Polymusic Records.
Yeah, and so Chernyavsky conducted on the Central Park in the Dark.
He did, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, oh come on.
Well, of course, it also contains the unanswered question, which is a very beautiful.
Yeah. So that I also believe is the first recording of unanswered question. So let's. Is this the second one? Okay.
This is the first one.
Yeah. One of the problems with that album is that in order to fit the tracks on the sides of the record, he scrambled them. And so, because remember, because we had to, so with Smithsonian, Frank heard it, he's like, the tracks are in the wrong order. Well, we knew that from Emery Cook's record. And so we actually worked editing the record, and Frank is a stickler for details. The copy that I have right here was rejected because there's a misspelling of one letter on the back of it, and Frank wouldn't have him put it out. So he exercises editorial control. He's just published a book, incidentally, that I have 35 copies of here, and will be for sale afterwards. They go to his scholarship fund at Bates, and for 16 bucks you can get a copy of Frank's most recent publication. I've got to crank as much as I can. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, while List plays on there, I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the other components of. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, much better. That's. Maybe I can put it back a little bit. And then I want to show you the great, because this is a complete collection. I sat with this particular version of the List score, which was it's the 1880s edition of the List, and I sat with the score, and I can tell you exactly that this is the score that was played in this recording, because there's a couple of phrasing markings that are countered to the original score, and they are exactly the phrase markings on the recording. So, you know, so we have the legal documents, we have the sound recording, and we have the score that we can match to the thing. I have never seen anything this complete ever.
Unless you want to do the next one, a little bit of this.
This recording was highly revered at the time, but I think it was only around like 500 copies.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was a very, very short run, but it was reviewed in New York Times and like that, but people couldn't play it.
This was 1952. Then I want to bounce forward 2 tracks to La Campanella. I'll tell a little story about Frank. When we first listened to this, he called me up and he said, "They must have speeded those tapes up. I don't ever play it this fast." you.